Hello, you beautiful people. Today we're back with a do not draft these players list. So these are guys that I would avoid drafting in your fantasy drafts for various reasons. I'll go ahead and list them all, give you my reasoning as to why I would avoid drafting them. Obviously, I'm not saying don't draft them at all. There are certain circumstances when I think it is worth picking them. But for the most part, it's just that their average draft position is way higher than I think it should be, and I just wouldn't take the risk in drafting them. So yeah, we'll just go ahead and get into it. Before we begin, don't forget to drop a like and subscribe. Trying to hit 1,000 subscribers by Christmas. If you could help us out, I'd really appreciate it. And yeah, let's just get right into it. So first up on my list, this is the player I would avoid drafting the most because his average draft position is so goddamn high, and I don't understand why. And it's going to be Kevin Durant. Now, I'm not arguing that Kevin Durant isn't the best player in the league right now in terms of in real life basketball, but if we look at it from the fantasy perspective, he played 35 games last year, and he's being drafted around the 9th position. I just don't understand why you would take the risk on a guy that's he came off an Achilles injury, very serious injury. He's going to miss a lot of games. The Nets are going to be close to the top of the league. They're going to have a lot of incentive to rest Kevin Durant, along with other things. He really is saving himself for the playoffs. And I just don't really get why you would draft Kevin Durant over guys like Jason Tatum, Steph Curry, Vucevic, De'Aaron Fox, any of them really. I would take all of those guys over Kevin Durant. If I was going to draft Kevin Durant, it wouldn't be honestly, I don't even think he's going to finish in the top 20. And I think it's really just a case of people are valuing the namesake over the actual contribution that they're going to be getting from the player. So Kevin Durant, I would avoid drafting him. You don't really have to worry about getting him in the 20s because odds are someone in your draft is going to be like, oh, Kevin Durant, I should definitely grab him. But yeah, for us people who take fantasy a bit more seriously, if you mess up your first pick, your season's pretty much over. So I just don't really get why you would take the risk on Kevin Durant when there's plenty of other options that are going to give similar value per game and also give you the durability of playing multiple games per season and not just half of them, and you don't have to worry about them sitting out back-to-backs and all that other shit. So yeah, guys that I would draft ahead of him. I'll have a full rankings list coming out tomorrow, but for now, the guys that are close to him, Steph Curry, obviously going to take him over him. Jason Tatum, I'm drafting him over. Vucevic, I'm taking before Durant. Zion, De'Aaron Fox, Sabonis, the list goes on. I'll put the full thing out tomorrow, like I said, but for now, I would very strongly advise against drafting Kevin Durant. I know some other fantasy channels are for it, but I just really don't see why you take the risk. It's so unnecessary, and there's plenty of better options. So next up might be even more of a controversial opinion, but it's going to follow a similar reasoning pattern that I had with KD, and it's going to be LeBron James. So the thing with LeBron is that his average draft position is 13th right now. And for a guy going into his 19th season, I don't really care who it is. LeBron, I love him, still think he's the GOAT, but if we're looking at the Lakers roster, they brought in Russell Westbrook. That's going to take some load off LeBron. He's going to be resting back-to-backs, almost guaranteed. He's not going to really be focusing too much on the regular season at this point in his career. It's pretty much go for the title no matter what. So I would expect his fantasy production to be a bit lower than it would be in a normal LeBron season. But yeah, the past 3 seasons with the Lakers, he's had major injuries, 2 of them. He only played in, how many games was it last year? 45 games last year. So I really just don't think it's worth the risk in taking him. Don't get me wrong, I love LeBron, but I just think there's other guys around his draft position that I would much prefer to have on my team just for reliability and consistency purposes. And I know it's oh, but what if I pass on LeBron? LeBron isn't going to be a top 10 guy in fantasy this year. I can almost guarantee it. And I just don't really get why you're so infatuated with taking him because he's of what his name is instead of what actual production he's going to be contributing to you. So that's why I would avoid taking LeBron. Someone in your draft is going to take him top 15 almost guaranteed in every league. It's just hard to avoid him, just the name. He's the biggest name in basketball, honestly. So yeah, for those of you that watch this video, I would avoid drafting LeBron James. I would take LeBron if it's around pick 20. I think then I would be more comfortable snagging him. But for top 15, I would much prefer to have a more reliable, consistent option. So moving on, it's going to be Ben Simmons. As a general rule of thumb, from now on, if a player is out going into the season or they're whining that they're not going to play another game for the rest of the season with that team, I just don't think it's worth drafting them. Let that problem belong on someone else's team. I don't want to have to worry about where Ben Simmons is going to go, how it's going to affect his value. Obviously, he's probably going to be a pretty decent player, but as for now, he's getting drafted around 40th. I think there's a lot of better options there, and I just don't want to have to deal with the BS of him not playing games, maybe playing, not knowing where he's going to go. Sort of a similar situation. There could be when Andre Drummond got shut down last year with the Cavs where they looked to trade him, maybe a similar sort of thing could happen with Simmons. He refuses to play for a few weeks. He doesn't get any games at all under your belt, and it's really just not worth having him on your team. So yeah, I'd avoid drafting Ben Simmons. I don't know what the Sixers are going to do with him. Let someone else worry about it. You can have plenty of better options around the 40th position. There's Jaylen Brown, Zach LaVine, guys like that you are aware of where they're playing. You know they're going to play games. They're really solid options, and yeah, I just avoid drafting Ben Simmons just don't want to have to worry about it. Fantasy is very complicated. Why make it even more difficult for yourself by worrying if your players are actually going to play games or not, and where those games are going to be? So next up is Kyrie Irving, and I guess this one could sort of apply to all the unvaccinated players that are currently in the league. So like Kyrie Irving, Bradley Beal, Jonathan Isaac, guys like that. And maybe like to a certain extent Michael Porter Jr. as well. It's really just not worth having to deal with the trouble of having those guys on your team, having to worry about whether they're going to get vaccinated or not. They're going to be missing a lot of games if they contract the Rona. They might not be able to play in some states. Kyrie Irving is the big example because he can't even play in his home games. And it's like Kyrie Irving is like the type of player that would be like, oh, I'm going to take a personal stance being a fucking idiot, not getting vaccinated. So I really just wouldn't bother drafting him. Right now, I think his average draft position is, let me just double check here. He's getting drafted around 33rd. I'm just not bothering drafting Kyrie at all. I'm not even going to give you a position to draft him in. He's really just not worth having, not worth the trouble. Avoid drafting him. If he doesn't get vaccinated and chooses to sit on his moronic ideology, then he's going to be missing around 41 games of the season at least. So why bother having that? His production is going to be way down. Who knows how he's going to be able to play with the team and other things. There's even talk about like just shutting him down for the whole season or something. So Kyrie Irving is just not worth having on your roster at all. I would not draft him in any circumstance in any league. It's really just not worth the effort. If news comes out that he has received the vaccine, then that changes things, and I think his average draft position is a bit too low. He's like a clear top 20 performer for me. But yeah, if he doesn't play, it also boosts the value of James Harden and Kevin Durant a little bit. While I still would avoid drafting Kevin Durant, James Harden's value sort of skyrockets if Kyrie's out. And yeah. And another thing with Kyrie, even if he does get vaccinated, there's still the injury risk. Like I said, he's still like a top 20 player even with the injuries, but it's mainly just the vaccination status. It's not worth having him on your team. And the same thing sort of goes, like I said, for all the unvaccinated players. So like Bradley Beal, there's plenty of guys around his position that are vaccinated and don't have to worry about stuff like that. So I would look at options there. Then Jonathan Isaac and Michael Porter Jr. Michael Porter Jr. would be a really solid option. He was someone I was really looking forward to drafting this year, but due to his vaccination status being up in the air, I'm really not looking to take him on any of my teams. He's someone I'm going to look to avoid. And yeah, with that being said, we'll just go ahead and get on to the next player. Next up is someone that I always take a habit to avoid in my fantasy drafts. It's going to be Kristaps Porzingis. And while his average draft position is pretty low this year, it's around 65th, I just don't want him on my roster. He hasn't played more than 60 games in a season since 2016. He had the ACL injury. Last season, he only played 43 games. The season before that, 57. While he's still going to give you some production in those games, I'd rather just have a guy that's going to play 82 games or get around like a lot closer to it than Kristaps is. He's healthy right now, but judging off his injury history, his build, he's always at risk to getting injured. If he wasn't going to like such an injury risk, I definitely would look into taking him because he has like 2010 potential, but it's really just not worth it. And also on the Mavericks, I don't know how it's going to play it with Jason Kidd. Maybe Kristaps will be more involved and his post touches back again, but as for now, I can't really see him having that sort of significant of a fantasy impact just due to the lack of games played. It's really just not worth your effort and your time, and I think there's plenty of better options around the 65th pick. Coming in next on my list of players to avoid is going to be Jonathan Isaac. So in addition to not playing at all last season due to an injury, he's also not vaccinated, and I just don't understand why people want to draft a guy that didn't play at all last season due to a severe knee injury. Like, he's returning now. I just really don't see why you'd want to take the risk, even if it is a low pick. I don't think he has that much of an upside that it's worth drafting him. His average draft position is 85th, but to me, I don't think he's going to finish inside the top 100. If a guy misses the entirety of a last season, he tore his ACL and his meniscus, I really just don't see the point in drafting him. I'm not interested in dealing with that. There's going to be missed games. It's sort of like inevitable. He's going to work his way back into things. Who knows? Maybe he'll outperform his draft position, but for me, I am more of a cautious fantasy manager, and I'm not really looking forward to taking players that have missed an entire season due to a knee injury or like a lower body injury. So Jonathan Isaac next on my list of players that I would not draft. And lastly, they'll just group these three together. It's going to be Klay Thompson, Kawhi Leonard, and Jamal Murray. So Klay Thompson's a bit of a different example because he is probably going to be back earlier in the season than the other two. They're aiming at around December to January, but even then there's going to be the whole process of like getting him back into the swing of things, a bit of load management, sort of trying to work his way back into the lineup. He hasn't played in 2 seasons now, I believe it is. We all know he tore the ACL, then he tore the Achilles. I just don't understand why we're drafting guys that haven't played in 2 seasons because of like just severe lower body injuries. His average draft position right now is around 96th, but he's going to be taking up an IR spot until around January probably for like at least the first few months of the season. So I really just wouldn't bother. There's plenty of more like consistent, reliable options that I would much prefer to have. And yeah, Klay Thompson is just really not someone I'm interested in drafting. Then if we look at Jamal Murray, I don't think he's going to be back. There's no timetable for his return right now. No point stashing him on your IR. Someone else on your team is going to get hurt, and you're going to have to just drop him anyway, so why waste the draft pick? You know what I mean? It's just not really worth it at all. And then moving on, we'll go on to the last player. It's going to be Kawhi Leonard. And he had a partially torn ACL, and he's expected to miss a lot of time this season. Nobody knows exactly when he's going to return, but yeah, it's just really not worth drafting him. He's going to be taking up an IR spot for at least a few months of the season. You don't even know when he's going to be back. There's going to be load management. He's not going to play back-to-backs. They're going to ease him into things. And the production that he's going to give you isn't going to be as great as the production that you can get from someone that's going to be playing night in and night out. So yeah, these three are players that it's just like, why bother wasting the IR spot on them? If someone else on your team gets hurt, which is pretty much inevitable, you're going to have to drop them anyway. So I just wouldn't bother and just get a more solid pick in your draft if you can. But yeah, that's going to wrap up the video. Thank you guys very much for watching. This is all my opinion. This is just guys that I'm personally leaning towards not drafting, or at least not drafting at their average draft position, but at least like 20 spots below it. Like, a lot of you guys may disagree with me. If you do, feel free to drop which players you disagree with in the comments below. I just do tend to err on the side of caution when drafting like injury-prone players, and for this season, unvaccinated players. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching, like I said, and as always, I hope you guys all have a great rest of your day.